only another myth.
Jane Campion is back to bless us with her first feature film since 2009 with The Power of the Dog. Benedict Cumberbatch and Jesse Plemons are two brothers who own a cattle ranch in 1920s Montana. Cumberbatch is a hard-walking, hard-talking, and pretty foul-smelling, by all accounts, cowboy, whereas his brother is becoming more sensitive, more attuned to a modern and maybe more genteel time. Already angry at his brother's changing ways, Cumberbatch becomes enraged when local woman Kirsten Dunst catches his brother's eye, and begins to victimise both her and her outsider son. The Power of the Dog is organised into chapters, each of which really focuses on a different pairing of its main characters that are all described in that potted introduction just there. Now, Cumberbatch is the star of the show, but everyone else gets really important moments there. And if anything, the whole story kind of boils down to explaining exactly why Cumberbatch is the way he is and how he got into that situation. So the first section really focuses on these two brothers, Phil and George, or as Phil calls him, Fatso. That's Cumberbatch and Plemons. Phil is an obviously very rugged and masculine guy. He even wears his boots to bed and apparently never seems to wash, apparently has never tried a modern bathtub. His favourite thing is to hide away at night, noodling away on his banjo, and he's obsessed with kind of staying on the ranch and working with the men there. But underneath all of that bravado, Cumberbatch is this unsettled and insecure character. Him holding onto those rituals is really part of him trying to make sure that he still has a place in this changing world, the changing West that he's in. And so instead of it just being, oh, that's Phil's way, that's how he wants to do things, it's really because he's holding on, he's clutching at straws, he's trying to keep these repeating rituals that he himself learnt from a famous cowboy who's kind of entered into memory there, which is Bronco Henry. And it's that intense focus on a very particular conception of what masculinity means that makes Phil so angry at Dunst's son. He spent his whole life working towards being this like hyper-masculine cowboy ranch-owning dude. And then he meets this quite effeminate kid who's very introverted and is very focused on like intelligence. He's studying to be a doctor later on in the film, and it just screws with his head. It's something that he cannot abide, he can't allow it to happen. And not only that, but making fun of this kid is a way of him shoring up his position with his brother, who is trying to move away from these rituals, who's thinking about ways they might modernize or even make more civilized, as it were, their operation and the men that they work with. And for all that Phil wants to stop things changing, it's actually him making fun of that kid that kicks off the plot, because that's why Plemons returns to and then bonds with Kirsten Dunst's character. Now, if you're not familiar with Campion's work, and I can't exactly blame you because, like I said, she hasn't done a movie in over a decade, although she has done some excellent TV in that intervening period, I think her films are, at their heart, always about the intersection between desire and power, and the ways in which articulating either of those things affects the other. It's quite common in Campion's film to see a really hyper-masculine character who then does these surprising and almost subversive things with his masculinity, maybe without even realising it. And one good example would be Mark Ruffalo, of all people, playing this extremely masculine and quite misogynist in some ways police officer in The Cut, who nonetheless kind of turns out to have an interesting empathy and relationship with Meg Ryan, who's the lead character in that film. So for all of Cumberbatch trying to intervene and kind of shore up this masculine view in his brother's life, he ends up inviting this woman into his home. And that's something that's unbearable to him, so he starts to victimize her. Remembering that the Campion trademark is these kind of intersections between desire and power, you might think there's some sort of unspoken lust or kind of attraction between Cumberbatch and Dunst. But actually, as we find out, Cumberbatch's obsession with Bronco Henry masks something deeper, some deeper depth of feeling towards that now departed man. But that doesn't mean that he can't be furious at his brother finding happiness, or even maybe just finding what feels like a softer life with this woman. In one scene, he's lying asleep in his bedroom, which is next door to his brother's bedroom with his wife, and he hears them having sex, and absolutely fuming, he goes outside, goes down to the shed where he keeps Bronco Henry's pristine saddle with a plaque and a candle and everything, and he just starts to roughly work the lever. And Campion is always interested in textures and touch, and so we have this moment where we see this like very firm and almost rough sometimes, but at the same time strangely tender act of care towards this remnant of a possibly loved past life. You know, this person who was in this other person's life who's gone, and they're trying to keep their memory alive, or maybe just reminiscing over whatever their relationship contained, because we never get exactly an understanding of what that was. So in this second chapter of the film, we get much more of a focus on Cumberbatch and Dunst. And then in the next part of the film, we get more of a focus on Dunst and her son. And then the last part of the film, we get Cumberbatch and the son. And so there's this kind of shifting focus throughout the film that is very deftly handled by Campion. And without wanting to spoil it, the outcome of that is what is, I suppose, in the absolute sum of its parts, a thriller, but is much more of a character study of Phil and his relationships with the world and with himself. I've always been on the fence with Cumberbatch because I think when he tries, he's a really good actor, but he often falls into a comfortable niche for him, which is of course the insufferable genius. And I've had some disagreements with mates who've seen this film who feel like Phil is just another insufferable genius. But I think that's too shallow an analysis of the film. As far as I see it, Phil has a sense of himself as an insufferable genius. You know, this kind of master manipulator, and certainly that's how Dunst sees him. But there are several scenes where it turns out that he's just flat wrong, or he's misunderstood a context or a situation, and ultimately that's really where the plot lies. You know, he does all these schemes to try and get people to do stuff, and they end up backfiring on him. Right at the start, with him making fun of this kid, which ends up with his brother taking on his wife. And Cumberbatch's portrayal of that is excellent because he plays it completely straight. You know, there's no laughs in it. He's just flabbergasted when things go wrong for him. And yet he is also a really strong character, so we can feel for Dunst when she's being absolutely trod under his feet. There's an excellent set piece about a third of the way through the movie where Dunst has been asked to perform a piece of music for an important dinner party at the ranch because she used to be a piano or an organist player in a cinema in like kind of her previous life. And nervous with this grand piano that her husband's bought for her in this big echoey house, she tries to shut all the doors that she can and quietly practice. And as she's practicing and fumbling over these notes, she hears the banjo playing upstairs. And slowly Cumberbatch creaks open the door and plays it while looking at her down from the balcony, as if to say, anything you can do, I can do better. There's no place for you here. It's a wonderfully observed set piece, and I think it already ranks amongst the best of Campion's works. And it's also, I suppose, got a kind of in-joke in it, in the sense that Campion's most famous film by far is The Piano, about a virtuoso piano player, and the way in which he uses that to communicate with the world. And the opposite is true here, where this woman who is a very middling pianist cannot communicate with the world via that piano. So there's lots to dig into for the Campion fans with this movie, but I think it's also a really good jumping on point for anyone who hasn't seen her work previously, because it's much more accessible and more clearly structured than her more experimental work in, say, In the Cut, which has a lot of like weird montagey and associative stuff in it, or The Portrait of a Lady, which actually has like a very strange introduction. So yeah, check out Power of the Dog, which is currently on limited cinematic release and will eventually be available on Netflix, I believe December 10th worldwide. I'd love to hear what you thought about this densely layered character study come Western thriller. Let's have a chat in the comments below. Oh, and to say before we wrap up, if you haven't considered it yet, then maybe it's time to hit that subscribe button and to get more reviews like this one in your feed. Have a good one, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.